The courtroom buzzed with an oppressive silence on that fateful morning, May 24, 2025, at 9:29 a.m. Pakistan Standard Time. Every eye was fixed on the man in the dock, a former police officer whose life had unraveled in the span of a single, chaotic moment. His face bore a calm mask, but his eyes revealed a weary soul, shadowed by exhaustion and regret. He stood accused of murder, a charge stemming from an accidental death during a split-second act of self-defense. The law, rigid and unyielding, demanded scrutiny, turning a human error into a courtroom battle. The wooden benches creaked as spectators leaned forward, their breaths held in anticipation. The judge, an elderly figure with silver temples and deep-set wrinkles, presided with a stern yet compassionate gaze. Years of judicial service had etched wisdom into his features, and he listened intently as the prosecution laid out their case. The officer's defense attorney argued passionately, painting a picture of a man who had no choice but to protect himself when time stood still. The air grew heavy with emotion as the trial neared its climax. The officer's family sat in the front row, their faces a mix of hope and dread. Among them was his young daughter, no older than 6, clutching her grandmother's hand. Her wide eyes darted between her father and the judge, unaware of the gravity pressing down on the room. The prosecution rested, and the defense concluded, leaving the courtroom in suspense. As the judge prepared to deliver his verdict, a hush fell over the assembly. It was then that the officer rose, his voice trembling yet resolute, breaking the silence with a plea that would change everything. The room waited, hearts pounding, for what would come next in this unexpected turn of events. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes locked onto the judge with a desperate intensity. "Your Honor," he began, his tone soft yet firm, "before you pass your verdict, I ask for one thing, please allow me to hug my little daughter. Just once." The words hung in the air, a raw plea that stripped away the legal formalities and exposed the human beneath the uniform. A collective gasp rippled through the spectators, followed by a quiet sob from the front row where his daughter sat. The judge's gavel paused mid-air, his silver-haired head tilting slightly as he processed the request. The prosecution exchanged uneasy glances, their argument suddenly feeling hollow against this emotional outpouring. The officer's attorney nodded subtly, supporting the unconventional request, while the jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The little girl, no older than 6, looked up at her grandmother, her small face etched with confusion and longing. The grandmother whispered something reassuring, her own eyes glistening with tears. The officer's past flashed before the room's imagination, years of service, moments of bravery, now overshadowed by a single tragic mistake. He had acted in self-defense, a reflex born of instinct, yet the law demanded accountability. The judge, known for his impartiality, seemed to wrestle with an internal storm. His wrinkles deepened as he considered the man before him, not a criminal mastermind, but a father broken by circumstance. The courtroom held its breath, the tension palpable as the judge deliberated. Would he grant this simple, human request, or uphold the cold rigidity of procedure? The answer would set the tone for what was to come, leaving everyone on edge as they awaited his decision. The judge's stern expression softened as he looked at the officer and then at the little girl in the front row. His voice, usually steady and commanding, carried a faint tremor as he spoke. "I will allow it," he said, setting the gavel down gently. The room exhaled in unison, a wave of relief washing over the spectators. The officer's shoulders slumped, gratitude flickering across his face as he turned toward his daughter. The grandmother nudged the girl forward, her tiny feet hesitating on the polished wooden floor. The judge's decision broke protocol, a rare moment of humanity piercing through the rigid framework of the law. The prosecution team sat in stunned silence, their objections unspoken, while the defense attorney offered a small, appreciative nod. The jury watched intently, some visibly moved by the unfolding scene. The girl walked slowly at first, her small hands clasped tightly in front of her, as if sensing the weight of the moment. Her father dropped to one knee, opening his arms, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. The courtroom seemed to shrink, the walls fading as the focus narrowed to this single, tender interaction. Spectators dabbed at their eyes, the emotional gravity pulling at their hearts. The officer's past, a career dedicated to protecting others, clashed with the tragic accident that brought him here, and now, this moment of connection with his child humanized him in everyone's eyes. The judge adjusted his glasses, his gaze fixed on the pair, his own emotions barely concealed. For a fleeting second, the courtroom wasn't a place of judgment but a space where love and vulnerability took center stage. As the girl reached her father, the air thickened with anticipation, every onlooker aware that this embrace would mark a turning point in the trial's emotional arc, setting the stage for the verdict to come. The little girl reached her father, her small arms wrapping tightly around his neck as he knelt before her. The courtroom fell into a hushed reverence, the sound of her quiet sniffles the only break in the silence. He closed his eyes, his strong hands gently cradling her back, as if trying to pour every ounce of love and apology into that single hug. Tears streaked her cheeks, mirroring the dampness in his eyes, a silent exchange of emotions too deep for words. The spectators watched, their own breaths shallow, as the scene unfolded with raw authenticity. The officer's uniform, once a symbol of authority, now lay discarded, replaced by the vulnerability of a father clinging to his daughter. The judge, seated high above, turned his head slightly, his handkerchief reappearing as he dabbed at his eyes. The jury members exchanged glances, their stern expressions softening, touched by the undeniable bond before them. The prosecution sat motionless, their arguments fading into irrelevance against this display of humanity. The grandmother in the front row clasped her hands, a silent prayer escaping her lips as she witnessed the reunion. For those few seconds, the courtroom transformed, no longer a place of accusation, but a sanctuary of compassion. The officer whispered something into his daughter's ear, a private moment lost to the onlookers, yet palpable in its tenderness. She nodded, her grip tightening as if afraid to let go. The air was thick with emotion, a collective heartbeat pulsing through the room. This embrace wasn't just a father's plea fulfilled, it was a testament to the fragility of life and the strength of familial love. As they held each other, the judge cleared his throat, signaling the return to proceedings, yet the impact of this moment lingered, setting the stage for a verdict that would echo beyond the courtroom walls. The judge straightened in his chair, his gavel resting untouched as he watched the father and daughter part. The girl returned to her grandmother, her small hand clinging to the older woman's as she wiped her tear-streaked face. The officer rose to his feet, his gaze following his daughter before turning back to the judge, a mixture of gratitude and apprehension in his eyes. The room remained still, the weight of the moment lingering like a heavy fog. The judge removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if to steady himself. His years on the bench had exposed him to countless cases, but this one struck a deeper chord. He saw not just a defendant, but a man whose life had been defined by duty, now marred by a single, tragic accident. The officer's sincerity, his regret, his pain, had been evident in every word of his testimony. The judge's mind flickered to his own family, a brief memory of his granddaughter's laughter surfacing before he pushed it aside. He had to remain impartial, yet the human element of this case was undeniable. The jury sat in rapt attention, their earlier stoicism replaced by a quiet empathy. The prosecution's case, built on the letter of the law, now seemed cold against the warmth of the scene they just witnessed. The defense attorney leaned forward, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, hoping it would sway the final decision. The judge glanced at the officer once more, noting the man's clasped hands and bowed head, a posture of genuine remorse. The law demanded justice, but justice wasn't always black and white. As he prepared to speak, the judge felt the weight of his role more acutely than ever, knowing his next words would not only decide a man's fate but also shape the future of a family forever torn by circumstance. The judge adjusted his robe, his fingers lingering on the fabric as he prepared to deliver the verdict. The courtroom held its breath, every eye fixed on him as he rose slightly in his seat. The officer stood rigid, his hands clasped tightly, while his daughter peeked from behind her grandmother, her small face a mix of hope and fear. The judge's voice broke the silence, steady but laced with an unusual tremor. After careful consideration of the evidence, the circumstances of self-defense, and the sincere remorse expressed by the defendant, he began, pausing to let the words sink in, "I find this case to be exceptional." A murmur rippled through the room, quickly stifled as he continued. "The law is a structure, but it must also reflect humanity. Taking into account the impact on the defendant's minor child, I am inclined to show leniency." The prosecution shifted uncomfortably, their earlier confidence waning, while the defense attorney's face lit with cautious optimism. The jury nodded subtly, their earlier deliberations now aligning with the judge's tone. The officer's eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing his features as the judge pressed on. "Therefore, I sentence the defendant to a suspended term, with conditions of community service and counseling, rather than imprisonment." The room erupted in a mix of gasps and quiet sobs, the tension dissolving into relief. The little girl broke free from her grandmother, rushing toward her father once more, her arms outstretched. He knelt again, enveloping her in a second embrace as tears streamed down his face. The judge watched, his own eyes glistening, before banging the gavel softly to restore order. This verdict wasn't just a legal ruling, it was a testament to compassion prevailing over strict justice, leaving an indelible mark on all who witnessed it. The courtroom buzzed with a newfound warmth as the officer lifted his daughter into his arms, her small frame fitting perfectly against his chest. Her tears had turned to a shy smile, her tiny hands patting his shoulders as if to assure herself he was truly there. The grandmother approached, her face etched with relief, placing a gentle hand on the officer's back. The spectators watched, some wiping their eyes, others exchanging hushed whispers of approval. The judge leaned back in his chair, the gavel now a silent symbol of mercy rather than judgment. The officer's embrace tightened, his whispered words to his daughter lost in the soft rustle of movement around them. This wasn't just a reunion, it was a restoration of a bond nearly shattered by the weight of the law. The defense attorney gathered his papers, a rare smile breaking through his professional demeanor, while the prosecution remained silent, their case overshadowed by the human victory unfolding before them. The jury members rose, their faces reflecting a mix of satisfaction and contemplation, as if the trial had taught them something beyond legal precedent. The officer set his daughter down, kneeling to look into her eyes, promising her a future free from the shadow of this day. The grandmother's hand lingered on his shoulder, a silent pledge of support for the days ahead. The judge cleared his throat, signaling the end of the session, but the emotional current in the room refused to dissipate. This moment transcended the courtroom, offering a glimpse of redemption and hope. As the family prepared to leave, the officer cast a grateful glance at the judge, who nodded subtly in return. The trial's end marked not just a legal resolution, but the beginning of healing for a family that had faced the brink of despair. The courtroom doors swung open as the officer and his family stepped out, the little girl clinging to his hand, her steps lighter now. Inside, the atmosphere shifted from tension to a quiet reverence, the judge's decision echoing in the minds of all present. Spectators lingered, discussing the unprecedented verdict in hushed tones, their perspectives altered by the day's events. The judge remained at his bench, reviewing notes, his usual stoic demeanor softened by the memory of the embrace he'd allowed. Word of the ruling spread quickly beyond the courtroom, reaching colleagues, journalists, and even the public through murmurs in the hallway. The officer's story, a man of duty turned defendant, saved by a father's love, struck a chord, igniting conversations about justice and mercy. The defense attorney packed his briefcase, reflecting on how this case might influence future trials, while the prosecution team retreated, their arguments overshadowed by the day's emotional weight. Outside, a small crowd gathered, some offering supportive nods to the officer as he shielded his daughter from the growing attention. The grandmother smiled weakly, her strength bolstered by the community's response. The judge eventually rose, his robes rustling as he prepared to leave, pausing to glance at the empty dock where the officer had stood. This ruling wasn't just a legal anomaly, it was a ripple of compassion that challenged the cold machinery of the law. The officer's journey, marked by sacrifice and redemption, became a symbol for those who believed in second chances. As the family disappeared into the daylight, the courtroom emptied, leaving behind a lingering sense of hope. The judge's action had shocked everyone, not with severity, but with its profound humanity, setting a precedent that would be remembered long after the gavel's final echo faded. The officer and his family stepped into the sunlight, the courthouse fading behind them as they walked toward their car. His daughter skipped beside him, her laughter a stark contrast to the heavy silence of the courtroom hours earlier. The grandmother followed closely, her face glowing with a cautious optimism she hadn't felt in months. The officer's heart, once burdened by fear of imprisonment, now beat with a renewed sense of purpose. He glanced down at his daughter, her tiny hand in his, and vowed to rebuild the life they'd nearly lost. The community's response was immediate. Neighbors who had once whispered about the incident now approached with words of support, some even offering help as he transitioned to civilian life. The suspended sentence came with conditions, community service and counseling, steps he embraced willingly, seeing them as a path to redemption. At home, the officer sat with his daughter, helping her color a picture, the mundane act grounding him in this second chance. The grandmother prepared dinner, the clatter of pots a comforting backdrop to their healing. News of the judge's ruling spread further, inspiring debates on legal forums and among advocacy groups, with many praising the balance of justice and compassion. The officer reflected on his past career, knowing he could never return to the force, but finding solace in the idea of mentoring youth, perhaps sharing his story to prevent others from similar mistakes. His daughter hugged him tightly before bed, her innocent trust a reminder of what he'd fought for. The day's events had reshaped their future, proving that even in the face of tragedy, love and understanding could pave the way for a new beginning. As the stars emerged, the officer looked out the window, grateful for the judge's mercy and determined to honor it with a life of meaning. The officer's story lingered in the air long after the courtroom doors closed, becoming a beacon of hope in the legal community. Months passed, and his commitment to community service transformed him into a local figure of resilience. He spoke at schools and youth centers, his voice steady as he shared the lessons of his trial, emphasizing the power of accountability and redemption. His daughter thrived, her laughter filling their home, a testament to the stability her father's second chance provided. The grandmother, once worn by worry, found peace in their renewed bond, often joining him in outreach efforts. The judge, now retired, received letters of gratitude, his ruling cited in legal discussions as a rare blend of justice and empathy. The case sparked a movement, with advocacy groups pushing for reforms to consider family impact in sentencing, citing the officer's trial as a precedent. The prosecution, though initially opposed, began to reflect on the case's broader implications, some even attending seminars on restorative justice. The officer's counseling sessions deepened his understanding of his actions, turning regret into a drive for positive change. His community service hours turned into a mentorship program, guiding at-risk youth away from the paths that had once ensnared him. The little girl, now growing taller, often sat in on these sessions, her presence a silent inspiration. The courtroom where it all began stood as a symbol of that day's unexpected mercy, its wooden benches holding the memory of a father's plea and a judge's compassion. The officer's legacy grew beyond his past, woven into the fabric of a community that had witnessed justice evolve. As he looked back, he saw not just a trial, but a turning point that reshaped lives, proving that even in the harshest moments, humanity could prevail and leave a lasting mark.